So today I want to talk about what I consider Elden Ring's DLC's biggest problem to be, which isn't difficulty, but is somewhat tied to it, and that's the lack of builds through the homogeneity of said builds due to the difficulty of the game. So I started with 4 builds ready to go. I had a Pyromancer, a Sorcerer, a Lightning Plate user, where I used the Bolt of Granax or whatever, and a Shield, and I had my closest adaptation of a Shadow Knight / Death Knight warrior with 2-handed, wears plates. And I decided to go into the DLC with the Lightning Plate wearing guy that you can see on the screen now. This is no spoilers ahead, other than the first hour, maybe 2 hours of the DLC. This is recorded me when I went straight in, and there's no bosses or anything. It's just the very beginning of the game, so if you haven't played it yet, no spoilers. So going into the DLC, I've played all 4 of those builds so far, and I can tell you this: if you're a caster, you can't actually just cast anymore like in the regular Elden Ring. Elden Ring is different than Dark Souls 1 or 2, but similar to 3, where your spells don't start getting very powerful until you get to a higher intelligence or faith, comparatively to what they did in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. So the power curve is slower, and you're very weak in the beginning of the game compared to like a sword and board user or a 2-hander where you can just like kill things in a couple seconds. A sorcerer or a faith-based user is going to have trouble just trying to keep their mana up or kill things quick enough. But eventually, you progressively get better, just like in most games where you're a wizard or something. You get powerful enough where you can kill anything with bolts, and it's awesome. And then you get to bosses, and you can annihilate bosses, but if you get hit, you're dead. You don't really have any defenses because you've put so many points into your intelligence and mind that you are somewhat squishy. You don't have a lot into endurance, so you can't roll around a lot. You got to keep light armor. So it's a payoff. You can do a lot of damage at range, but you are squishy when it comes to getting hit. But, enemies are usually fairly slow, and you can telegraph, their attacks are telegraphed. When it comes to the DLC, this is not the case anymore, because most enemies have some kind of gap closer, or they have really long weapons, and if they do hit you, it's going to be 3/4 of your health from just a regular monster. No joke. So you need to pump that endurance up, and you need to pump that vigor up way higher than you would for the regular game. Again, homogenizing your build. As for when it comes to armor, in the base game, say I wanted to play a plate wielding class, or quick plate using class, you can pump a lot of points into endurance, and you can get some pretty beefy armor in the game. So in the beginning of the game, there's not too much armor that you can wear that will really protect you comparatively, but at the end of the game, you can get like 40 endurance. You got like a big old plate set. You're gonna negate a lot of that damage. You can actually be pretty tanky. When it comes to Shadow with Erdtree, even you can get the first giga plate armor off the first little mini boss, and you're still gonna get chunked for half your health. So instead of getting chunked for 3/4 of your health, you're gonna get chunked for like 60%. So it's barely just barely protection. Like, there's not very much protection comparatively to the base game, which already wasn't very protective comparatively to old Dark Souls games, especially Dark Souls 1 and 2. So your armor doesn't really have too much of an effect anymore. The only things that you can really defend with are light rolls and blocking. But blocking is a little useless comparatively to the base game, outside the first couple areas in the DLC. Because the first couple areas, most enemies only have like slow attacks, and they only attack like 1 or 2 times. But later on, most enemies will have multi-attacks. So even with a big boy shield, where you're taking 80% less endurance loss from your boost on your shield, those 5 hits are just going to wear your endurance down so much. It's just easier just to do one light roll away, and your armor, if you do get hit, it's going to chunk you no matter what, so your armor doesn't matter at all. So your 2 defense options are even stack higher endurance and use a shield, or light roll. Armor doesn't really matter. So, since enemies, including or especially bosses, have like 5, 6, 7 hit combos on every single attack with delay attacks and stuff like that, you're gonna need a ton of endurance no matter what build you're playing. So the days of playing a caster with minimal endurance, so you can just, you know, charge up a couple attacks and then roll out of the way of the one attack of the boss, no. You have to have a lot of endurance to multiple rolls, multiple blocks. So everybody has high endurance. No matter what your armor, you're going to get chunked for half to 3/4 of your life from a regular mob. And so everybody has to have high vigor. Enemies have so much health now that you're going to have your main stat very high, which you probably already were. And so you're kind of everyone's just kind of homogenized. Like, there's no more real builds. There's no, and especially not hybrid builds. Like my plate Death Knight type build, I would run around with my two-handed sword in plate armor, lots of vigor, and I had a good amount of mind, a good amount of endurance, and a good amount of faith. So, and a good amount of strength. So it's kind of mid-road, where regular enemies, I would just, you know, bash them in with my two-handed sword, and then if I got a big enemy, I would throw, you know, black bowl, whatever it's called, the black fireball, black flame, I think it's called, and great on bosses too, because it does percentage health damage, and yeah, it was like a cool hybrid character. When I got him to Shadow of the Erdtree, the hybridness is not working out. My points are just spread too thin. So if I want to go into the DLC, I'm actually going to have to be above level 150, which is what I brought all my builds into the game with, was 150, to try to give them like an equal share, like an equal shot, you know. In the default game, the hybrid builds were awesome. Like, you got some heals there, you got some AoE, or not AoE, you had some casting, your melee was fine. But in the DLC, everything has so much HP and stuff, and you're spread too thin. You know, you have enough mind to cast, well, you're not going to have as much endurance or another stat that you really need. So every build kind of just becomes really homogenous, and it's kind of a bummer. And that leads me to a wishing that there was a different leveling system when it came to Shadow of the Erdtree. I wish it wasn't just these little fragments that you found. I wish that there was a new stat pool or something. Like, just, it could have been so simple as just to have brought us into a secondary, like, just stats, but shadow stats. And then, you know, you could add to those when you leveled up or something like that. But they only worked in the Shadow of the Erdtree area. Because I do like the aspect of wandering around to find those fragments, because I really like going into these games blind, and I really like exploring, and it gives you a reason to explore. For the people that don't like doing that, it's probably really boring. You just look at a page and you go find them really quickly just to become powerful. But for people that go in blind and like want to explore, it gives you a reason to want to explore, to find those things, and you get excited when you do. But it's just it doesn't add anything, you know? It doesn't add anything to the game itself, to your build or anything. It just makes what you have a little bit stronger. And if you're doing a build that's not homogenous to all the other builds, where you have a ton of health, a ton of endurance, and then your main stat, and then you're just going to be weak. You can't be like this mid of the road builds. And casters are just pretty fairly weak, I would say, comparatively to my other builds that I've tried. But yeah, that's all I pretty much have to say about Shadow of the Erdtree right now. Is that's my biggest disappointment, is the homogeneity of the builds now. And I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. That's what it is. What it is. I guess if I want to play those, you know, my Dark Knight or something like that, I'm just gonna have to go into the DLC, you know, 40 levels higher, which is still gonna be hard. But I need those extra levels just so I have enough endurance to roll out of the way, and I have enough life to not be one tapped. But yeah, that's about it. See you guys later in the next video.